All right, hello. Welcome to Managing for Failure. My name is Amy Norris. My pronouns are she, her. And before we get started, I've got some disclaimers. So first of all, there will be swear words. I will try not to. I know it's not great for some people, but I know me pretty well, and I promise to try not to. I also promise to fail. So it is what it is. Number 2, one size does not fit all. What works for me might not work for medical tech. I like to say we're not saving lives here, but if that's literally not true for you, then hopefully there's still some things you can bend to fit. And then lastly, consider the barriers that your team might have. People are going to be averse to failure for reasons from neurodivergence to past experience and beyond, so just try to keep your own privileges in mind. All right, who am I and why am I qualified to teach you how to be incompetent for fun and profit? Well, as the very big screen says, I have been a developer since 2017. Before that, I was a graphic designer for a bit. I got my degree in studio art from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Don't recommend getting a studio art degree. Free advice. I lied to get my first dev job at National Land. If you want that story, you'll have to talk to me later. I don't have time for it in this talk. And since then, I have switched jobs once and been promoted 4 times, now being the software development supervisor at Dimensional Innovations. And one of my strongest held beliefs is that in order to be our most successful, we need to fail. So I try to encourage my direct reports to have what I call a failure mindset. And what that means is failure is good and necessary. We all know that we learn when we fail, but for some reason we still see it as a bad thing. If learning is good, then failing is good. And just to give you an example of ways that I have failed straight out of the gate, I'm going to tell you the story of my worst workday so far. And I say so far because I know it can always get worse. So this was at that previous job, the real estate company. So maps, realtor tools, that kind of thing. And at the time, I was the only developer on staff. I had inherited the system from the previous only developer on staff, and we'd overlapped and worked together for about 2 years, and she had been gone for about 4 months prior to this story. So it is March 13th, 2020. Yep, the people in this room with me are all making the noises I'm expecting, because you already know it's going to be bad. It's Friday the 13th. This is the first day that, COVID lockdowns have really started in earnest. I am out of town. I'm in Chicago on a sort of working vacation because, if you're the only developer on staff, you're always on call. There's nobody else to call. And I wake up very sick for some reason in Chicago on vacation to a frantic call from somebody at work saying that the website had been hacked. Specifically this, our agent portal. So I drag myself wearily out of bed. I'm not panicking yet because the last time they told me the website had been hacked, somebody had just cleared out their little form filler thing and thought that their password was gone forever. So my bar for expecting hacking was pretty low. Unfortunately, the website had been hacked. So instead of the usual screen that you would get after that login screen, you got a big scary skull and some ominous looking words in what I think we determined were Danish. So here I am, sick, on vacation, right? Fully panicking that this issue that is not my fault, but fully my problem, will not be within my ability to fix. And on top of all of that, am I even going to be able to get back home to Kansas City in 2 days on the Amtrak? Don't know. So, what else can you do? You dig into the problem. Normally, I would ask you all what you think the problem is, but I can't actually see you because of the lights. So I'm just going to assume that somebody would have answered with what I usually get of, well, the website was hacked. But that's not actually the problem. I mean, that is a problem, and that's the cause of the current problem. But the now problem, the problem that needs solving before anything else actually matters, is that the agents can't get to their tools. So luckily, what is the actual problem is a lesson that I have learned from previous failures, so that's where I started. How can I get rid of the skull and get the agents back to their tools? Once I solve that, I can dig into, how did this happen? What else did they get into? How can we prevent this from happening again? And the most important question, where in the city that is rapidly shutting down can I get an entire gallon of edible cookie dough? Because I'm going to need a little treat. All right, so picture me panicking, physically ill with probably COVID, desperately needing to fix this. I only have my laptop, not even a mouse because I'm traveling, my brain, and probably excessive caffeine intake. I fixed that problem in 48 minutes. It felt like 48 hours. It took me another 3 hours to find the source of the breach and slap a patch on it. Probably 2 weeks to really get into the underlying security problems that led to this in the first place. And then multiple months and a job change before I was comfortable enough to leave my phone alone for more than 2 minutes of a time because I was sure something else was going to happen. Now, I tell the story for a few reasons. First of all, it's just credentials. I want you to know that I have seen some shit, and I know exactly what an emotional and psychological punch in the face a real failure can be. Second, to bring up the point that I was only able to solve that in 48 minutes because I've had so much practice with failure and problem solving prior to this. And then third, I like to point out that failure is the boss monster of success. So like I said, this problem was not my fault, but I really probably should have seen it coming. Like, there were things that were probably clues that I missed. But regardless of that, after I got it fixed, I was rewarded. My boss sent me a gift card. Everybody was utterly amazed at my ability to get shit done under utterly terrible circumstances. It was one of those and then everybody clapped moments, except, I was on vacation and I worked remote anyway, so there wouldn't have been clapping, but there could have been. The point is that one massive failure was absolutely a turning point for me in that job in a positive way. So what do I mean when I say failure? The most common definition is probably something like this, which, yeah, that's not wrong, but it's also not really what I mean. I think there's a difference between a useful failure and a simple lack of success. And the difference is, did you learn anything? So when I say failure, what I mean is something closer to this. Because this is really the crux of it, right? The problem with failure usually isn't the failure itself. It's how you and the people around you react to the failure. And to be clear, I'm not saying that those reactions are necessarily wrong. Depending on the scope of the failure, an extreme emotional reaction may be warranted. The biggest trick to managing for failure is learning to separate your emotional response from the analytical one, and we're going to get to that later. But I want to get you behind me first. So, why do you want more failure? Well, you want more failure because you want less failure. And that sounds kind of circular, fair, but stick with me here. I want you to think about failure on a sliding scale. Hopefully you can read all of the memes. So your website getting hacked while you're on vacation and probably have COVID, that's a 10. Everything is bad raccoon. Taking down a small client's production on a Tuesday night when nobody's looking at it, yeah, it's more of a 2. Not great, but it's probably fine. So now, I want you to think about the first time you took down production. If you haven't done it yet, know that you will, it's inevitable. But remember how that felt. The panic, the first time I took down production, I took down our biggest client's email server for 2 full days. So this was a multi-million-dollar manufacturing client. who now could not send or receive emails about orders, problems, supplies, nothing. 2 full days. So my brain is going, oh my God, I'm going to get fired, someone's going to scream at me, everything is going to be terrible forever. So now think back to your taking down of production and actually fixing whatever your problem was. In that state of mind of everything is going to be terrible forever, do you think you fixed that problem as quickly as you would have if it had just been a bug fix? No, of course not. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. That same email problem today, I could probably fix in an hour or less, but panic, inexperience, and a complete lack of support made things worse for everybody. But now think back to the next time you took down production, and again, if you haven't done it yet, it will be a recurring experience. But it's not as bad, right? I didn't get fired the first time, I only got screamed at a little bit. Your brain remembers that, and then hopefully the next time it's better. Hopefully your first time was better and you didn't get screamed at all. But you do it a little better, you fix it a little faster. But what if you had gone into that first failure with the relative calm of the second, or the 5th, or the 10th? That's what you want failure for. Your brain learns from little failures and big ones. So, to make the slide make sense, think about fixing a flat tire. Most people don't know how to do that until they're on the side of the road, and then they're figuring it out on the side of the highway. But there's no reason you need to do it that way. You can flatten your own tire, learn how to do that today. Your brain's going to learn the same lesson either way. And then another reason you want failure is the hidden risks of perfect teams. We don't want teams that never fail, because we want teams that are constantly learning and growing and getting better. And you can't do that without failure. We need our teams to fail so that they can learn and grow, and we need them to be comfortable doing it so that it's something they want to do and not something that they're panicking about. If you're failing on purpose, it can be fun, and you can still learn things from failures that you made happen intentionally. But it's a little bit uncomfortable, right? It's a little unpleasant. People see us not being our best. Not great. So that's where we're going to start, with making you as a manager comfortable with failing. So this is the bit that I talked about earlier about separating your emotional response. We're getting to that. You have to put your own mask on before assisting others. If you're already comfortable failing, great. This is when you go check your Slack messages, come back in 5 minutes. If not, we will get you there. But it's gonna be hard. That's the reason for my definition of an emotionally upsetting learning experience. Failing kinda sucks if you're not used to it. But that's why you need to practice. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, that you should practice being bad at stuff, but why though? Failure is a skill, and it's a skill that you can improve. There's a reason that one of the first things circus performers are taught is how to fall. They're going to, and knowing how to do that safely is an absolutely imperative skill. So I really do want you to practice failing. So, choose a hobby, something you've always wanted to learn how to do, a language, an instrument, whatever, I don't care. Just get really comfortable with absolutely sucking ass at it. If you start to get good at it and you still like it, that's great, I love that for you. Pick something else and start sucking at that. The point is to always be being bad at something. Now, this is going to be great. It's going to help you work through the emotional response of being bad at stuff by teaching your brain that you are always going to be bad at stuff. The world's not going to end. And it can be helped along with a technique I like to call worst, best, probably, because I'm bad at naming things. So, step 1, consider the worst case scenario for whatever you're attempting. Go balls to the wall. If you fail, are you going to burn down the building? Is anyone going to die? Will you personally suffer any negative consequences? If yes, what? Be specific. Write it down or keep it in your head. And then move on to step 2, which is the same thing, but for the best case scenario. If you absolutely knock it out of the park, will you get promoted? Will you get a huge raise? Will you get invited to speak at a really cool conference where you get to talk in front of a movie screen? You never know. And then finally, what's most likely? And most of the time, the answer here is going to be nothing happens. You set out to do a thing, you did the thing. That's it. The point of this is to get your lizard brain on board. Your lizard brain is scared of everything. If you can convince it that your worst case scenario and your best case scenario are pretty much equally unlikely, you're going to calm down a little bit. And once we've got the lizard on board, we can move on to the higher functions. And that means closely examining your failures and figuring out why they happened and what you can learn from them. So this is another example from my more recent past at my current job. I was working on this project for the Kansas Cosmosphere, space stuff. And it looks like this. So we've got 2 buttons and a hand crank on that little thing in front of the guy, 2 giant screens, and 2 actual rockets on either side with LEDs. And this is a pretty simple app. You hit a button, it lights up either rocket, changes some of the graphics, and then you turn the crank until your rocket blasts off, it plays a little video, and it wiggles the floor. That might sound like a lot if you're not used to analog inputs and outputs, but it's really pretty simple. Like, I don't care about rotational speed, direction, none of that. It's just push button, crank, go spinny. That's it. It works with a rotary encoder. This is the one that I was using on my desk to test with, because obviously that whole setup wouldn't fit in my office. And it worked perfectly on my desk. It worked perfectly when I went on site to test the install. And by the time I got back to Kansas City, we were getting so much noise on that encoder that it was functionally useless. So what the heck? Well, it turns out that rotary encoder that I was testing with and the one that we installed weren't the same one. And further, the one that they installed on site was not installed correctly. So that's a very simple explanation that took us about a month to figure out. And from the outside, that doesn't sound like my fault, right? I didn't pick the hardware we used, I didn't install it. Not my circus, not my monkeys. But really looking at it, there are definitely things that I could have done to speed along solving that problem. So starting with not assuming that the encoder I was using was the same one we were using. And then once it became clear that they weren't the same, not assuming that, well, it's a rotary encoder, they all work the same way. Yes and no. So that was a really unpleasant experience. The client got madder and madder the whole time. But taking the time once it was fixed to really look closely at what we could have done differently, what questions we could have asked, means that next time we'll be able to fail faster and more efficiently. And that means asking yourself hard questions. Or even better, getting somebody else to do it. So once you have the whole story from the beginning, through the failure, through the solution, get someone who knows nothing about it at all and rubber duck that whole problem at them. See, the slide makes sense. This is Doctor Who, by the way. The point is to get someone with fresh eyes on it. Get them to ask you questions as you're telling them the story so that you know the things that you might have missed the first time through. All right, so we're going to recap. Step 1, get really comfortable with failing. Step 2, dig deep on what you can learn from it. Now that you're good to go as an individual, we're going to move on to getting your team good with the failing. So I do want to be clear, this is a long-haul project. All right, you're not going to be good at it tomorrow. It's going to take time. Months, maybe years. It's taken me years, and I'm still working on it, which is fine because you want to lead by example. So not hiding your own failures is a great place to start. One way I do that is by asking stupid questions in our developer Slack channel when I get stuck on stuff. And I do this for 2 reasons. Number 1 is a lot of my stupid questions end up being, I had a typo, or it was something someone else has already solved. So I am outsourcing my work to other people because I'm very lazy. And then number 2, I am modeling the behavior I want to see. All of my direct reports know that they can go to the same Slack channel, ask their stupid questions, and even if it is something completely ridiculous that they definitely should have noticed, nobody's going to ridicule them about that because I'm doing it first. None of these examples are particularly relevant, although I do really like I am a cacophony of problems today. That one's fun. And you're really going to want them to be comfortable with this kind of thing, because the next thing we're going to do is get them out of their comfort zone. Because your comfort zone is a comfy place to be. That's why we call it that. But you're not going to grow in there. And most people aren't going to leave on their own. They need a gentle nudge, or maybe a solid kick in the ass. And what that means for you is that you need to be assigning projects to people who you're not sure can finish them alone, or who you're definitely sure can't finish them alone. But absolutely crucially, you have to have those kind of support structures in place first. Someone who doesn't know that they're allowed to ask questions is going to shut down. They might think they're going to get screamed at for their failure. We don't want that. So if you're starting from zero, you want to start small. We're not throwing somebody into the deep end of Touch Designer, which none of you have probably even heard of, on day one, right? Maybe just slap in new CSS framework on top of the JavaScript framework that they already know. Baby steps. And then we also want to encourage accountability. And not in a whose fault was this kind of a way, but in an owning your mistakes kind of way. And this is another behavior you can model. So same thing, when I fuck up, I go to the developer Slack channel, you know, my latest push took down this database. Does somebody have an hour to help me get it back on the rails? Less now since I can ask Claude, but. And then we also want to talk about what not to do. So I'm going to start with a non-tech example here, because everybody in this room, I assume, at one point or another, was a teenager, because that's how time works. So I'm assuming most of us were probably the kind of teenager that liked to hide in your room, maybe away from home, but then every once in a while maybe you get a wild hair and you want to go hang out with your parents. So you walk into the living room where they're watching Law and Order, because for some reason they're always doing that, and your dad looks over and says, well, look who decided to show their face. That's kind of shitty, right? Like, why would I want to do that again if I know I'm just going to be chastised for not having done it sooner? The same thing is true for adults in all situations. Don't punish behaviors you want to see more of. In fact, if you can reward those behaviors, even better. And we don't need anything crazy here, right? I mean, nobody's getting a gift card every time they do their timesheet, but a simple thank you in a Slack channel, especially if you do it publicly, can go a really long way. And it's going to go a lot farther than public shaming, because people who see you rewarding other people want the rewards. And people who are getting the rewards want more rewards. Works across the board. So the last thing we want to do is chastise people for making mistakes they can learn from. Instead, frame it like that, as a challenge that you know they can meet. And it's important within all of this that you keep your cool. All of the right words in the world mean nothing if you are visibly panicking while prod is down. So, that's not to say you shouldn't be panicking. Your emotions are your emotions. As smarter people than me have said, you can't control your feelings, you can control your actions. So, if you need to freak out, that's fine. Go do it in the bathroom where no one can see you, and then come back and try to be as chill as you can. You should have an idea of how your team is going to handle whatever the current problem is. If you don't, you should learn. But is everybody heads down working on their own piece of the puzzle? Would they prefer if you commandeered a meeting room and pulled everybody together? Again, you should hopefully know these things in advance, because we don't want to be pushing people out of their comfort zone when the shit is already mid-fan. And that's the last don't. We need to be pushing people out of their comfort zones, but slowly. And that's going to vary depending on individuals, But for anybody, too quick of a shove from the comfy to the horrors is a good way to get a flight, fight, or fawn response. And we don't want that, right? You'll get better results with incremental change. Okay, you're on board. You have some ideas on things you could maybe do with your team, but I want my team to fail more is not the kind of thing that most bosses are probably going to be like, oh yeah, great idea. So, assuming you have someone you answer to, you have two choices. Option 1, pitch it to your higher-ups and get their buy-in in advance. Option 2, ask forgiveness, not permission. To go with option 1, we are going to want to pitch the benefits of failure. So come see me after the talk. I have business cards. My rates are very reasonable. I'll come give the talk. No, I'm kidding. It's this, right? You're going to have less downtime in the long run, so you'll have higher productivity. You're going to have higher customer satisfaction because you're going to get problems solved faster. And you're going to have a more cohesive team because they're all going to have the opportunity to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses before they need to know what they are. For option 2, do whatever you want until somebody yells at you about it. This is my mantra for life. Ideally, the interruptions will be minimal enough that by the time somebody catches you doing it, you'll have some really good arguments for why you should be allowed to continue. And I can't tell you which of the two options is the best. That's really going to depend on your relationship with your bosses and whether you think they'd be more amenable to, wasting a little bit of time or being slightly lied to by omission. Now, if your team is really skittish about failure, or if you just want to start even smaller, we can start super small. So, just like we have you practicing your failing with a hobby, you can encourage that for your teams too. But one thing that I did at DI before I was even a manager was to introduce board game hour. This was for selfish reasons because I wanted to play board games, but games, and especially co-op games, which all of these are really good ways to practice failure in a super low stakes way. And they encourage team building, so bonus. But you're going to lose, right? If you've ever played Pandemic or Castle Panic, they are almost impossible to win. Great way to practice failing. One caveat on this, if you do decide to go the board game route, don't frame it as a failure exercise. Frame it as team building, or just fun. If people think that they're being tested at how good they are at failing, they're going to act differently, and we don't want that. Another easy thing to do is internal projects. So documentation is really good for this, internal tools, something where the only people that are going to see the failure is either you, as the boss, your team, or maybe the company at large, but not the public. The public is scary. So you could also start an internal hackathon, again, for internal tools or just for whatever. Make everybody build their own fun new arcade game. Doesn't matter. The point of any of this is not the result. It's to give people a chance to fail with nothing at stake. And remember that people don't know how to fail. I know this sounds crazy, but remember my example about the circus performer. They're not taught how to fall because they've never fallen down before. We've all fallen before. We've all failed before. That doesn't mean we know how to do it. So assume your team does not know how to fail, and then give them the tools to learn how. And I've got some concrete strategies for you. So 30-15 fail is a strategy that I use all the time. So just like it says on the screen, set a timer for 30 minutes. If in that time you have made no progress, then you need to take 15 minutes and do something else. Don't set a timer for that one. That one's just kind of ish. So work on something else, go have lunch. If it's in the end of the day, come back tomorrow, that's fine. Just at least 15 minutes. If you then come back and still have no new rabbit holes to explore, no new solutions to try, then you have failed and you need to ask somebody else for help. And don't let that stop you from asking people for help earlier if you think they'd have your answer. This is just for the point of getting stuck, which is the next concrete strategy that dovetails with this one, making failure the goal. That sticks really well with 30-15 fail, because if you make 30-15 fail your guideline, failure is your goal. You want to get to a point on your project where you don't know what to do next. That means you're about to learn something. That's where you want to be. The other way to make failure the goal is to set a certain number of failures as your goal. So when I first got into public speaking, I set my goal to be rejected by 30 conferences in a year. The goal was not to get accepted anywhere. The goal was 30 rejections. Now, I set that goal in January of 2020, so it didn't work, but the strategy is solid. I rehashed it in 2022. I knocked the goal down to 10 because we all know why. But it worked great that time. I actually got accepted to the very first conference I applied to, and then I got rejected by a whole bunch of other ones. And I've kept that goal to this day. I want to be rejected by at least 10 conferences a year. Because one, that makes sure that I'm actually submitting. And two, it means I'm submitting to places that are, kind of stretching my limits. Like, I don't think NDC Oslo is going to accept me, but wouldn't it be cool if they did? I didn't think Star Trek was going to accept me, and here I am. Worth doing. The next solid strategy is to over-communicate. I mean this for everything, but I'm going to break it down because this is one of those things that sounds really obvious, but then you don't do it because you don't know where to start. So, here are the primary places you should be over-communicating, and I'm going to read them off my notes because I want to do them in order. So, positive feedback, negative feedback, expectations, changes to plans, and questions. So like I said, we're going to hit those in order, starting with the easiest one, which of course is positive feedback. This is a great way to encourage the behavior you want to see. We talked about that earlier, but this is how you crank it up to 11, right? It's great if you're already telling people, great job when they do something. If you're not doing any kind of positive reinforcement, please start doing that. But this is where you're really focusing on things that you knew were difficult for an individual. So I saw you post your problem in our Slack channel, and I really appreciate you doing that because now everybody else has access to the answer as well. The point of this is to be really clear of what you are praising and why it's a good thing to be doing. So asking questions is good because you're helping the whole team. Now, probably the hardest one is negative feedback. I hope this is the hardest one. Nobody should like giving it. Nobody likes getting it. And when it comes to failure, it can be really easy to ruin all of your progress with a mistimed criticism. So it's best here to remember that any failure is a learning experience. I'm going to keep harping on that. So offer help if it's possible for you to do so. So, I've noticed that when things go wrong with your projects, you tend to deflect rather than taking ownership. Is there anything I can do to make you feel safer in owning your mistakes? Or it seems like you struggle with asking for help. Can I give you a strategy that I use sometimes and see if that helps you? And then explain 30-15 fail. And just like with the positive feedback, it's important that you give clear direction on what the problem was and what they should be doing differently. And then when they fix it, positive feedback. Positive feedback is so much easier and goes so much further. If you're only giving feedback when you have a problem, you're doing it wrong. All right, expectations. The most important thing here is to over-communicate expectations for difficult times. So if the shit has hit the fan, are your employees expected to work 16-hour days? Are they expected to sleep at the office until the issue is resolved? Are they absolutely not expected to do that and should be comfortable leaving the fire burning, coming back to it in the morning. None of those are necessarily wrong answers, unless you're doing it all the time. Crunch time, I mean. But whatever strategy you pick, it's important that you communicate it early, ideally before you even make a hire, because there's nothing worse than getting asked to work a 16-hour day when you didn't know that was a possibility. Sucks way more. When I hired my last batch of new hires, we had a whole bunch of new work coming up that was going to be really, really tight. And I knew if I didn't set the expectation that our producers, kind of like project managers, were going to swoop in and convince these new hires, oh yeah, you need to get this done by the end of the week or else. There's no or else. I made sure I was clear with them that, yeah, we might have to work a little bit extra, but I'm not expecting 60-hour weeks. I'm not expecting you to sleep in the office. It'll get done when it gets done. Nobody's gonna die. It's fine. Because if you don't set those expectations, somebody else might take advantage of them. And of course, things can change. If you told everyone that you hired that you're never doing crunch time for any reason, and then you get a really important client or a really important project, and now you have to, that's fine. Just communicate why. People who are learning how to fail are going to be especially sensitive to change, because it's possible they'll think whatever you're changing was their fault. So instead of just coming up to somebody and saying, hey, I'm going to put somebody else on your project, go with something like, I'm sure you could get this project done on your own, but I think you'll be less stressed and the project manager will be less stressed if we give somebody else some of it to do. Plus, he'll get to learn a little bit about whatever the thing is that we're working on, and you'll get to practice your leadership skills. That's so much better. Because I know if somebody comes to me with, hey, I'm putting somebody else on your project, I think that's my fault. I think you think that I can't do it by myself, even if that's not true. So please be kind to your anxious failures in training, over-communicate your changes to plans. And then lastly, we've got questions. This one probably seems a little bit weird because by nature, questions are there to get clarification, but I'm sure we've all had our share of really unclear questions asked at us, right? So how are we going to over-communicate a question in a way that doesn't sound condescending? Well, as is true of so many things, it depends. So I've got examples, starting with, did you get my email? That is a straightforward yes or no question. However, if your boss comes up to you with this, depending on tone of voice, your relationship, how your day is going, this could spark the deepest dread imaginable. So let's clarify a little bit right out in the front. All right, this is better. I'm not getting fired over email. I appreciate that, but maybe this is my deck, maybe I've done something egregious. We can still do better. All right, this is so much better. All right, I know from looking at this what email he's talking about, what he wants me to do with it, why he wants me to look at it, and I have a clearly set expectation that he wants it back today. This is barely longer. Like that would take you maybe 30 seconds longer to type in Slack if you're a very slow typer. So worth it. Don't, okay? Please. Usually I ask for hands on this one, but since I can't see you all, I'm just going to assume that if you've ever been pulled into a meeting room with a serious or neutral sounding, can I talk to you for a minute, from your boss, that you're not expecting good things to happen. I have a really good relationship with my boss. I like to think I have a good relationship with all of my direct reports. I have also, in my past, been fully fired. So please, 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 don't. Okay, rant over. How do we fix it? Again, clearly communicating what you actually want and leading with that. So I'm working on capacity for next month, and I know you've been working with coworker on thing. Can I talk to you for a minute about how they're doing on that project? So much more clear. And you can also clarify after you've asked the question if you forget. So, can I talk to you for a minute? Oh, don't worry, nothing's wrong. I just want to talk to you about thing. They're probably still having a very tiny panic attack, but that's so much better. My last concrete tip is one of my favorite bits of life advice, and that's to be overly positive about useful failure. So I like to say, good job, mate, when I fuck up in a useful way. And this is a great thing to do for other people too, but especially good for your own brain, because we learn what we practice. So if you're constantly putting yourself down, either out loud or just in your head, you're internalizing that. On the other hand, if you're constantly saying, good job, me, you're internalizing that. And I know we all have this impulse to self-deprecate because we think it lightens the mood, but does it really? I feel like unreasonable confidence is way funnier and better for your brain. So, if I trip over the rug, face plant on the floor, and damn, I'm just so clumsy. Now we all feel weird. That's not cool. If I trip over the rug, face plant, get back up, damn, it's a good thing I'm so pretty. Yeah, see? You get it. Way funnier, way better for your brain. All right. So now you understand the value of failure. And you have some strategies that you can take back to your teams. I want to stress that you should not try to do everything at once, and you shouldn't try to take anything to your team until you've got your own head right. So, if you need to, take an action item for yourself, get a hobby, or 3. Start applying best, worst, probably to your work projects. If you're good, then take something back to your team. Start board game hour. Start an internal hackathon. Whether or not you decide to talk it over with your boss first, I hope you at least start enjoying your failures and reaping their benefits. And that's all I've got.